"Sir, you don't belong in first class." The words didn't echo. They cut, clean and precise, like a decision already made before he even stepped onto the aircraft. The cabin of Flight 247 sat still under soft amber lighting, polished surfaces reflecting quiet wealth, leather seats arranged in careful symmetry, everything designed to signal comfort, exclusivity, control. And yet, in that moment, none of it felt calm. It felt charged. Eyes shifted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The air itself seemed to lean in. Darius Cole didn't move right away. He stood in the aisle, one hand resting lightly on the back of seat 2A, his seat, the one printed clearly on the boarding pass now folded between his fingers. He wore a dark gray hoodie, fitted but unremarkable, black jeans, clean sneakers. No watch flashing status. No entourage trailing behind him. Nothing that announced who he was. And that was exactly the point. The flight attendant, Nicole Harris, 35, sharp posture, tighter smile, tilted her head slightly, as if studying a mistake that needed correcting. "I'm going to need you to step back, sir," she added, her tone clipped, rehearsed, the kind of voice that didn't expect resistance. Darius looked at her then, not with anger, not with confusion, but with a stillness that made the moment stretch longer than it should have. "That's my seat," he said, his voice low, even, almost quiet enough to disappear under the hum of the cabin. But it didn't disappear. It landed. Nicole didn't glance at the boarding pass. She didn't need to. Or at least, she believed she didn't. "We've already reassigned it," she replied, gesturing behind him toward the narrow aisle leading to economy. "You'll need to head back." A soft laugh came from 2 rows over. A man in a tailored navy suit, mid-40s, white, holding a glass of pre-boarding champagne, leaned toward his companion and murmured something just loud enough to be heard. "Happens all the time." Darius heard it. He didn't react. Instead, he unfolded the boarding pass and held it out, not aggressively, just offering reality into a space that had already decided to ignore it. "Check again," he said. Nicole's smile thinned. "Sir, I don't have time for this. We have priority guests boarding." Behind her, another attendant, Brian Foster, younger, leaning casually against the galley wall, let out a short breath through his nose. "Man, just go to your seat," he said, not looking at Darius directly, as if eye contact might legitimize the exchange. "You're holding things up." The phrase hung there. Holding things up, as if Darius himself was the delay, not the decision being made around him. 2 rows back, a woman in a beige coat lifted her phone slightly, thumb hovering over the screen. She wasn't recording yet. Not yet. But she was watching. Everyone was watching now. Darius glanced down at the boarding pass again, not because he needed to confirm anything, but because he recognized the pattern. He had seen this before. Not here. Not exactly like this. But close enough that the edges lined up. At 24, fresh out of business school, standing in a glass office in Dallas, being told he wasn't the right fit for the client-facing role. At 27, trying to check into a hotel where his reservation existed, but his presence somehow didn't. At 31, closing his first major deal while someone across the table asked whose assistant he was. The details changed. The tone didn't. He folded the boarding pass once more, slower this time. "I'm not moving," he said. Not louder, not sharper, just final. That was the moment the shift happened. Nicole straightened, the performance of patience dropping away to reveal something colder underneath. "If you don't comply," she said, "we'll have to involve security." The word security moved through the cabin like a ripple. Heads turned more openly now. The man with the champagne sat up straighter, interest replacing amusement. Brian pushed off the wall, stepping closer, his presence adding weight to Nicole's stance. "Don't make this a bigger issue than it is," he said. Darius looked at him, really looked this time, and for a brief second Brian hesitated. Not because he understood anything yet, but because there was something in Darius's expression that didn't match the situation they thought they were controlling. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. As if Darius already knew how this would end. "You've already made it an issue," Darius replied. A soft voice came from behind. "Excuse me," a young woman said, stepping slightly into the aisle. She wore a trainee badge, Mia Lang, early 20s, eyes uncertain but focused. I scanned his pass at the gate. It came up valid. Nicole didn't turn. "Stay out of this, Mia." Mia hesitated, then stepped back, but not all the way. Her phone shifted in her hand, screen facing inward now, recording without announcement. The cabin grew quieter. Not empty, just waiting. Brian reached out and took the boarding pass from Darius's hand without asking, glancing at it briefly before scoffing. "This doesn't mean anything if it's not in the system," he said, handing it back like it was already dismissed. Nicole tapped quickly on her tablet, her fingers moving faster now, more deliberate. The screen reflected in her eyes for a split second, then she nodded once, as if confirming what she needed to believe. "There's no record of you in first class," she said. Darius didn't look at the tablet. He looked at her. "There was," he said. Nicole's lips pressed together. "Not anymore." 2 rows back, the woman in the beige coat pressed record. The small red dot blinked to life. The moment had crossed a line. Brian leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide it. "Look, man," he said, "people try this all the time. It's not going to work. People like you." He didn't say it directly. He didn't need to. The sentence carried it anyway. Darius exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that resets something internal. The cabin lights seemed dimmer for a second, or maybe it was just the way the moment narrowed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. Nicole watched him, her expression shifting from irritation to something closer to caution. "Who are you calling?" she asked. Darius didn't answer immediately. He tapped once, held the phone to his ear, and waited. Around him, the aircraft felt suspended, like it hadn't decided whether it was still on the ground or already in motion. The engines outside hummed, steady and indifferent. Inside, everything held. "Rachel," Darius said when the line connected, his voice unchanged. "I need you to initiate executive override." There was a pause on the other end, not confusion, just confirmation. "Understood." A voice replied, calm, efficient. "Do you want full control?" Darius's eyes never left Nicole. "Full control," he said. Nicole let out a short laugh, the sound brittle. "This isn't going to help you," she said, folding her arms. Brian shook his head, stepping back half a pace as if disengaging from something already decided. Mia's grip tightened around her phone. The woman recording leaned slightly into the aisle to capture a better angle. Somewhere in the back, a man whispered, "What's happening?" But Darius didn't explain. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lowered the phone, slipped it back into his pocket, and took his seat, 2A, without asking permission, without waiting for approval, as if the entire cabin had just become something he no longer needed to negotiate with. Nicole opened her mouth to object, to escalate, to reassert control, but before the words came out, the overhead lights flickered once, subtle but unmistakable, and every screen in the cabin blinked to black for half a second longer than it should have. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded, and for the first time since he stepped on board, Darius allowed the smallest shift in his expression. Not a smile, not satisfaction, just certainty settling into place. The flicker was subtle, but it was enough to fracture the illusion of control that had filled the cabin just seconds earlier. Conversations did not resume. No one leaned back into comfort. Instead, every passenger sat just a little straighter, eyes moving from screen to ceiling to the man, now seated calmly in 2A, as if something unseen had just entered the room. Nicole noticed it first. Not the flicker itself, but the shift that followed it. Her tablet froze for a fraction of a second, the interface lagging in a way she had never seen before. She tapped it again, harder this time, as if pressure could force certainty back into place. "That is not possible," she muttered under her breath. More to herself than anyone else. Brian leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. "What is it?" he asked. Nicole did not answer immediately. Her fingers moved again, faster now, navigating through menus that no longer responded the way they should. "The system is not updating," she said finally, her voice lower, tighter. "It is like it is locked." The word hung there. Locked. Darius did not look at her. He did not need to. He had already seen this moment play out in his mind long before he boarded the aircraft. Not this exact version, not this exact crew, but the pattern, the escalation, the refusal to verify before judging. It was predictable. What came next would be predictable too. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat adjusted her phone slightly, making sure the frame captured both Nicole and Darius at the same time. The red recording light blinked steadily, documenting every second. Mia stepped closer again, this time not hiding the fact that she was watching closely. "Ma'am," she said carefully, choosing her words. "Maybe we should recheck the system from the main terminal." Nicole snapped her head toward her. "I said stay out of it." But the sharpness in her voice was different now. It was no longer authority. It was pressure. Brian straightened up, crossing his arms as if trying to rebuild the control that was slipping. "It is probably just a glitch," he said, louder than necessary, projecting confidence into a space that was no longer accepting it. "We still need him to move." Darius leaned back in his seat, one hand resting on the armrest, the other loosely folded in his lap. He did not argue. He did not defend. He simply existed in the space they were trying to remove him from. And that presence alone was beginning to unravel everything. 2 rows back, the man with the champagne lowered his glass, no longer amused. "You might want to actually check that," he said, his tone no longer dismissive but cautious. Nicole ignored him, or at least she tried to. She tapped her tablet again, then again, each attempt producing the same unresponsive screen. The interface flickered once more, then froze entirely. Brian exhaled sharply. "What is going on?" he asked. Before Nicole could answer, a soft chime sounded overhead. It was not the usual boarding tone. It was different, sharper, more deliberate. Every head in the cabin tilted upward at the same time. The overhead monitors, which had been displaying the standard welcome screen, went black again. This time, they stayed black longer. 1 second, 2, 3. Then text appeared. Not the usual airline branding. Not the standard flight information. Just a single line, stark against the dark screen. "System override in progress." The words did not need decoration. They carried their own weight. A murmur moved through the cabin, low and uncertain. Nicole's grip tightened around her tablet. "That is not authorized," she said quickly, almost reflexively. "That is not how this system works." Darius finally turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at the screen. "It is now," he said. Brian took a step back, his earlier confidence thinning into something less stable. "Who are you?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Darius did not answer. Not yet. Timing mattered. The cabin lights dimmed briefly, then returned, but the atmosphere did not reset with them. It deepened. The sense that something larger than the moment was unfolding became impossible to ignore. In the galley, a phone rang. One of the junior attendants picked it up, her expression shifting almost instantly from routine to confusion. Yes, we are on board." "I do not understand," she said, her voice barely audible from where she stood. Nicole noticed and turned sharply. "What did they say?" The attendant hesitated. "They said we need to stand by for executive instruction." The phrase landed like a foreign language in a familiar room. Executive instruction was not something that happened mid-boarding. It was not something that came through casually. It was not something that belonged here. Nicole shook her head immediately. "No, that is not correct. There is no executive protocol for this situation." Darius watched her now, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet focus, as if observing a system revealing itself piece by piece. He had spent years building structures, designed to operate smoothly, invisibly, without friction. But he had also built safeguards, layers, overrides, pathways that could cut through noise when necessary. Most people never saw them. Most people never needed to. But they existed. And now, they were active. The overhead speaker clicked once, a soft static sound that pulled every eye forward. The captain's voice began to come through, steady at first. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor technical." The audio cut off mid-sentence. Not faded. Not distorted. Cut. Clean. Final. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the subtle background noises of boarding seemed to pause, as if the aircraft itself was waiting. Then a new voice replaced it. Calm. Controlled. Unfamiliar to everyone in the cabin except one person. "This aircraft is now under executive control," the voice said. No introduction. No explanation. Just a statement. Absolute. Nicole's face drained of color, the certainty she had carried just minutes ago dissolving in real time. Brian looked from the speaker to Darius and back again, his posture shifting from assertive to uncertain. Mia's eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition that she was witnessing something that did not happen by accident. Darius stood slowly from seat 2A, not rushed, not dramatic, but deliberate enough that every movement carried weight. He adjusted his sleeve slightly, then looked directly at Nicole. "You said I did not belong here," he said, his voice still calm, still measured. The words did not accuse. They clarified. He paused, just long enough for the moment to settle into every corner of the cabin. "You removed me from a seat I paid for," he continued. Another pause. Then, finally, the line that shifted everything. "You removed the person who signs the approvals for this entire fleet." The words did not rise. They did not need to. They landed with a force that no volume could match. Around him, the cabin did not erupt. It did not need to. The reaction was quieter, more profound. People leaned forward. Phones lifted higher. The man with the champagne set his glass down entirely, both hands now free, attention fully locked on Darius. Nicole opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not because she had nothing to say, but because for the first time since the moment began, she did not know which version of reality she was standing in. And Darius, still calm, still steady, simply waited. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence that followed his words was not confusion anymore. It was realization, slow and heavy, settling into every seat, every glance, every breath inside that cabin. Nicole took a step back without meaning to. It was small, almost invisible, but it broke the posture she had been holding since the moment she first spoke. "That is not possible," she said, but this time the sentence did not sound like authority. It sounded like something she needed to believe to stay standing. Darius did not respond right away. He let the silence do its work. He let the weight of the moment stretch, settle, press against the edges of every assumption that had been made about him since he walked on board. Across the aisle, the woman recording shifted her phone slightly higher, capturing Nicole's expression, the frozen tablet, the screen still displaying the override message. The red light blinked steadily, turning a private failure into a permanent record. Brian swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the galley, then back to Darius. "You are saying what exactly?" he asked, the confidence gone now, replaced by something closer to caution. Darius turned his head just enough to meet his gaze. "I am saying," he replied evenly, "that every system you rely on to tell you who belongs here reports to me." The words were not loud, but they landed with precision. Behind them, the junior attendant still holding the phone lowered it slowly, her earlier confusion replaced by a quiet understanding that this was no longer a routine disruption. This was something else entirely. Nicole shook her head again, faster this time, as if movement alone could reverse what was happening. "We need confirmation," she said, grasping for structure, for protocol, for anything that could anchor her back into control. "We cannot just take your word for it." The overhead speaker clicked. Again, cutting through her sentence with surgical timing. The same calm voice returned, clearer now, sharper. "Nicole Harris, employee ID 7419. Your access privileges have been temporarily suspended pending review." The words did not rush. They did not hesitate. They arrived complete. Nicole froze. Completely. The tablet in her hand slipped slightly, catching against her palm before falling. Brian's eyes widened. "What did that just say?" he asked, but no one answered him. They did not need to. The answer was already unfolding in front of them. Nicole looked down at her tablet, then back up at the screen, then at Darius, her expression shifting through disbelief, denial, and something far more fragile underneath. "That is not real," she whispered. But it was. The system did not argue. It did not explain. It simply executed. Around them, the cabin was no longer passive. People leaned forward openly now, phones raised without hesitation. The man who had been sipping champagne earlier set the glass aside completely, both elbows resting on his knees as he watched the moment unfold with focused attention. Mia stepped forward again, closer than before, no longer trying to stay invisible. "Ma'am, your login," she said quietly. Nicole turned the tablet toward herself and tapped again. The screen did not respond. Instead, a single line appeared beneath her credentials. "Access denied." The words were simple. Final. Brian took another step back. Okay, hold on," he said, raising his hand slightly as if trying to slow something that was already moving too fast. "This is getting out of control." Darius looked at him, calm as ever. "It was out of control the moment you decided to rewrite the system instead of checking it," he said. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no quick answer for that. No easy pivot. The truth had already been exposed, and it did not require volume to hold its ground. The overhead screens flickered once more, then updated. The single line of text expanded into a structured display. Executive override active. Flight status, grounded. Crew status, under review. The cabin did not gasp. It absorbed. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible settled over the rows. Nicole stared at the screen, her shoulders lowering slightly as the reality she had been resisting finally began to settle in. You shut down the flight, she said, not as an accusation, but as a realization. Darius tilted his head slightly. No, he replied. I stopped it from leaving under the wrong leadership. The distinction mattered, and everyone in that cabin felt it. In the galley, another phone rang. This time, no one hesitated to answer. The attendant picked it up immediately, nodding as she listened, her posture straightening with each word. Yes, understood. We are standing by, she said, then ended the call and turned toward Darius. Ground control has confirmed, she said, her voice steady now. They are holding the aircraft until further instruction. Brian exhaled slowly, running a hand over his head. This is insane, he muttered. But even he did not sound convinced by his own words anymore. Mia looked from Nicole to Darius, then back to the screen, her expression shifting from uncertainty to something closer to clarity. You said we should check the system, she said softly, almost to herself. You never raised your voice. Darius glanced at her briefly. You do not need to raise your voice when the truth is already loud enough, he said. The line lingered, settling into the space between them. Nicole finally lowered her tablet completely, her grip loosening as if she no longer needed to hold on to it. She looked at Darius, really looked this time, not at his clothes, not at his posture, but at the presence she had misread from the beginning. Why did you not say who you were? She asked, her voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge. Darius did not answer immediately. He let the question sit, not avoiding it, but allowing it to unfold fully in the room. Then he spoke. Because you should not need to know who someone is to treat them with respect, he said. The sentence landed deeper than anything before it. Not because it was louder, but because it was undeniable. Around them, heads nodded subtly. Phones continued recording. The moment had shifted from confrontation to clarity. And in that clarity, something uncomfortable had been exposed. Not just in the crew, but in the system they had trusted without question. Darius adjusted his sleeve again, the same small, controlled movement as before, then looked toward the front of the cabin where the cockpit door remained closed, silent. We are not finished, he said calmly. And for the first time since the moment began, the tension in the room did not rise. It focused. The words settled into the cabin like a line drawn in permanent ink. We are not finished. They did not sound like a threat. They sounded like a fact. The kind of fact that did not need volume, only time. Nicole stood there, her hands no longer gripping anything, her posture no longer rigid, as if the role she had been playing had been quietly removed without her consent. Brian shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his earlier confidence replaced by a restless uncertainty that had nowhere to go. Mia remained still, her phone lowered now, not because the moment had lost importance, but because it had become something deeper than footage. It had become a lesson unfolding in real time. Darius turned slightly, his gaze moving across the cabin, not scanning for approval, not searching for reaction, but observing. The passengers were no longer passive witnesses. They were engaged, attentive, present in a way that made the space feel different. The man who had been holding champagne earlier now leaned forward fully, elbows on his knees, his attention fixed. The woman in the beige coat continued recording, but her expression had softened, no longer just documenting conflict, but recognizing its meaning. The aircraft itself felt paused, suspended between departure and consequence. From the galley, footsteps approached. The assistant lead attendant, a woman in her early 40s with a composed but now visibly shaken demeanor, stepped into view. Her name tag read Carla Jensen. She had been monitoring the situation from behind, waiting for clarity that never came. Now she stood at the edge of it, forced to face what had already shifted. Sir, she said carefully, her tone measured but respectful, we have Received instruction from ground operations to stand by for executive direction. I need to understand what is happening here. Darius looked at her, not with resistance, but with acknowledgement. What is happening, he said, is that your system just revealed a gap between policy and behavior. Carla held his gaze, absorbing the statement, her expression tightening slightly as she processed it. We follow protocol, she replied, almost instinctively. Darius nodded once. You followed assumption, he corrected. The distinction landed immediately. Carla did not argue. She could not. Because the evidence was no longer abstract. It was visible on every screen, every device, every silent face in that cabin. Behind her, Nicole let out a breath she had been holding too long. We did what we were trained to do, she said, her voice quieter now, less defensive, more searching. Darius turned his head toward her. Then your training failed you, he said. Not harsh, not raised, just clear. The sentence did not accuse her as a person. It exposed the system behind her. Brian shook his head slowly, almost to himself. This is going too far, he said, but even as he spoke, his voice lacked direction. There was no one left to convince. The truth had already settled into place. The overhead speaker clicked again, this time with a different tone, less abrupt, more controlled. All crew members remain in position, the same executive voice said. Do not initiate further action. Await direct review. Carla straightened slightly, instinctively responding to the authority in the instruction. Understood, she said quietly, even though she was not the one being addressed directly. The cabin screens updated once more. A new line appeared beneath the override notice. Internal audit initiated. Timeline recording active. The words carried a different kind of weight. Not immediate, not explosive, but permanent. The kind of weight that extended beyond this moment, beyond this flight, into records, reports, consequences that would follow long after the aircraft moved again. Nicole looked at the screen, then at Darius, her expression shifting again, this time towards something more grounded. This is going to affect everyone on this crew, she said, her voice steady but low. Darius did not look away. It already has, he replied. A pause followed, not empty, but reflective. For the first time since the moment began, the tension in the cabin was not sharp. It was heavy, thoughtful, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they are part of something larger than a single interaction. Mia stepped forward again, her voice soft but clear. You asked us to check the system, she said, looking at Nicole, then at Brian. You gave us a chance to fix it before it got here. Brian did not respond. He did not need to. The truth in her statement was obvious. The opportunity had been there. It had simply been ignored. Carla glanced between them, then back to Darius. What happens now? She asked. The question was not procedural. It was human. Darius took a slow breath, the kind that marks a transition rather than a reaction. Now, he said, we separate reaction from accountability. The words were precise, deliberate, each one placed carefully. Carla nodded slightly, understanding more than she expected to. Nicole lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked back up. We did not verify, she said quietly. It was not a defense. It was an admission. Darius acknowledged it with a small nod. No, he said. You replaced verification with judgment. The distinction held. Around them, the passengers remained silent, but their presence felt different now. Not just observers, but witnesses to a shift that extended beyond a single seat, a single boarding pass, a single decision. The aircraft no longer felt like a place of departure. It felt like a place of reckoning. The cockpit door opened. Slowly, the captain stepped out, his expression composed but serious, his eyes moving immediately to Darius. He had heard enough. He had seen enough. And now he stood in the same space, no longer above the situation, but inside it. Sir, he said, his voice controlled, we need to speak. Darius looked at him, calm as ever. We already are, he replied. And the weight of that response settled over the entire cabin, steady and unshakable. The captain did not move closer right away. He stood just inside the threshold of the cabin, one hand resting lightly against the frame of the cockpit door, as if he understood that stepping forward too quickly might collapse whatever fragile balance had formed in the space. His name tag read Daniel Reeves. Mid-50s. Years of command etched into the way he carried himself. But now, something in that posture had shifted. Not broken. Adjusted. Sir, he said again, more measured this time. I was not fully briefed on what occurred before I stepped out. Darius held his gaze, calm, unwavering. That is part of the problem, he replied. The words were not sharp. They were precise. Daniel absorbed them without flinching, his eyes moving briefly to the overhead screens still displaying the override notice, then to Nicole, then to Brian, then back to Darius. He was piecing it together in real time, not guessing, not assuming, observing. The way a pilot reads instruments when something does not align. Walk me through it, Daniel said, his tone steady but now directed, not commanding, but requesting clarity. Darius did not rush to answer. He allowed the moment to hold, to keep its weight, then spoke. I boarded with a valid ticket, he said. I was told I did not belong in the seat assigned to me. My access was denied without verification. My presence was questioned without review. And when I asked for a second check, the system was rewritten instead of corrected. Each sentence landed clean, without excess, without emotion layered over it. Just fact. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. He turned toward Nicole. Is that accurate? Nicole hesitated. For the first time since the moment began, she did not reach for authority. She reached for truth. We reassigned the seat, she said, her voice low. We believe the record was not valid. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Did you verify it through the main system? Silence answered before she could. Brian looked down. Mia remained still, her expression steady but firm. Carla Jensen stood at the edge, watching the exchange unfold with quiet focus. Nicole finally shook her head once. No, she admitted. The words settled heavier than any raised voice could have. Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that signals a shift from uncertainty to understanding. Then the system did not fail, he said. We did. The distinction echoed through the cabin. It was not defensive. It was accountable. Darius watched him closely, not judging, but measuring. There was a difference between authority that protects itself and authority that corrects itself. Daniel stepped forward now, closing the distance by a few feet, not aggressively, but with intention. Sir, he said, if what you are stating is accurate, then this situation has already moved beyond standard protocol. Darius nodded slightly. It has, he said. Daniel glanced again at the overhead screens, then at the passengers, then back to Darius. And the override, he asked, was initiated because of the failure to verify, Darius replied. Not because of disagreement. Because of process breakdown. Daniel held that answer for a moment, then nodded once, slowly. He understood. Not completely, but enough. Behind him, the cockpit door remained open, the quiet hum of instruments barely audible from within. The aircraft, once a controlled environment, now felt like a space where control was being redefined. Nicole shifted her stance, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. We were trying to protect the cabin, she said. Darius turned toward her. You were trying to protect an image, he corrected. Not the system. The words did not accuse her personally. They exposed the gap she had stepped into. Brian ran a hand over his face, the tension visible now, no longer hidden behind posture or tone. We see situations like this all the time, he said. People try to get into seats they did not pay for. Darius nodded once. And that expectation replaced your responsibility to check, he said. Brian did not respond, because the pattern had been named. And once named, it could not be ignored. Mia spoke again, her voice steady, grounded. He asked for a second check, she said, looking at Daniel. That should have been enough. Daniel glanced at her, then back to Darius, then to Nicole. The pieces aligned. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. The overhead speaker clicked once more. Captain Reeves, the executive voice said, you are requested to maintain current ground status and await final directive. Daniel straightened slightly, instinctively acknowledging the instruction. Understood, he said. Then he looked back at Darius. This aircraft will not move until this is resolved. He added, not as a question, but as confirmation. Darius nodded. Correct, he said. The cabin absorbed the exchange. Not with shock. Not anymore. With understanding. The kind that settles slowly but firmly. The woman recording lowered her phone slightly, not because the moment had ended, but because it had shifted into something deeper than confrontation. It had become clarity. Carla Jensen stepped forward, her voice calm but direct. We need to document everything from this point forward, she said, looking at Daniel. Every action, every decision. Daniel nodded. It is already being recorded, he replied, glancing briefly at the screen. Internal audit initiated. Timeline recording active. The words remained steady, unchanging. Nicole looked at Darius again, her expression no longer defensive, no longer certain, but searching. What happens to us now? She asked. The question was not procedural. It was personal. Darius met her gaze. Now, he said, the system does what it was supposed to do from the beginning. He paused, letting the meaning settle. It reviews actions based on facts, not assumptions. The sentence held. Around them, the passengers remained silent, but their presence felt different now. Not just watching, understanding. Daniel took a step back, not retreating, but recalibrating, his role shifting from control to coordination. We will wait for final instruction, he said. The cabin did not resist the pause. It accepted it, because the moment was no longer about movement. It was about consequence. Darius remained standing near seat 2A, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to repeat himself. The system was already speaking for him. And this time, no one was ignoring it. Time did not move forward in that cabin. It deepened, the kind of stillness that does not come from calm, but from awareness. Every second stretched, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was being understood at once. The systems were no longer hidden. The assumptions were no longer invisible. And the consequences had already begun. Darius remained where he was, standing beside seat 2A, not reclaiming it, not asserting it, just occupying the space that had always been his. His presence did not demand attention anymore. It held it. Captain Daniel Reeves turned slightly, his eyes scanning the cabin once more, not as a commander checking readiness, but as someone recalibrating responsibility. He had flown thousands of hours, managed turbulence, emergencies, system failures. But this was different. This was not mechanical. This was human. And human errors did not reset with a switch. They stayed. Carla Jensen stepped closer to him, her voice low enough to remain private, but firm enough to carry intent. We need to prepare for full documentation, she said. Not just internally. This is already being recorded externally. Daniel nodded once. He had seen the phones, the angles, the quiet determination in the passengers' hands. Then we do not manage perception, he said. We manage truth. The distinction settled between them like a shared understanding. Behind them, Nicole stood still, her earlier authority now replaced with something more difficult to carry. Awareness. She looked at her hands, then at the tablet that no longer responded, then at Darius. I made a call, she said quietly. Not to defend it, to acknowledge it. Darius met her gaze. Yes, he said. You did. No anger. No escalation. Just confirmation. Brian shifted again, unable to find a stable place in the moment. We were following patterns, he said, as if naming it might soften it. Darius nodded slightly. Patterns are only useful when they lead to truth, he said. Not when they replace it. The words did not attack. They revealed. Mia stood a few feet away, her posture straight, her expression focused, no longer uncertain. She had seen the moment when it could have been corrected. She had felt it. And now she understood it. He gave us time, she said softly, more to the room than to any one person. We just did not use it. The sentence lingered. It did not accuse. It clarified. The overhead screens shifted again, the text updating with a quiet precision. Review panel engaged. Executive board notified. Estimated response time, immediate. The word immediate did not feel like speed. It felt like inevitability. The system was no longer waiting. It was responding. In the galley, the phone rang again. This time, Carla answered it herself. She listened without interrupting, her posture straightening slightly as the voice on the other end spoke. Yes, she said after a moment. Understood. We are prepared. She ended the call and turned back toward the cabin, her eyes finding Darius first, then Daniel. Corporate response team is active, she said. They are reviewing everything in real time. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then we stay exactly where we are, he replied. Darius gave a small nod. Correct, he said. The cabin remained still, but the stillness had changed again. It was no longer tense. It was precise, focused, like a courtroom just before a verdict is read. The passengers did not speak. but their presence felt unified now, not divided between curiosity and uncertainty, but aligned in attention. The woman in the beige coat lowered her phone slightly, her expression thoughtful, as if she was no longer capturing a moment, but witnessing a shift. Nicole stepped forward half a pace, then stopped, as if unsure whether she had the right to move closer. "I thought I was protecting the experience," she said, her voice steady but softer than before. Darius looked at her, not dismissing the statement, but examining it. "You protected an expectation," he said, "not the experience." Nicole absorbed that, her eyes lowering briefly before returning to meet his. "And now?" she asked. The question was simple. The answer was not. Darius took a slow breath, not to pause, but to place his words carefully. "Now the experience becomes what it should have been from the start," he said. "Fair, verified, consistent." Each word landed like a reset, not of the moment, but of the standard behind it. Brian looked toward the front of the cabin, then back again. "This is going to change everything," he said quietly. Darius did not disagree. "It already has," he replied. The distinction mattered. Change was not something coming. It was something happening. The overhead speaker clicked once more. This time, the voice that came through carried a different tone. Not just authority, presence. "This is executive operations," the voice said. "All crew remain in position. Final determinations are being prepared." The words were calm, measured, but they carried weight beyond the cabin. Daniel straightened slightly, instinctively responding to the structure of the instruction. "Understood," he said. Carla nodded beside him, her posture aligned with his, no longer uncertain, but engaged. The system was no longer abstract. It was active. Mia glanced at Darius, then at the screens, then at Nicole. "It did not have to go this far," she said softly. Nicole closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "No," she admitted. "It did not." The admission did not undo anything. But it mattered, because it marked the moment where awareness replaced resistance. Darius watched her for a second longer, then shifted his gaze back toward the front of the cabin. He did not need to say anything else. The system was already speaking, and this time, no one was interrupting it. The cabin lights remained steady. The screens remained active. The aircraft remained grounded. But something inside that space had moved. Not forward, not backward, deeper, and everyone in that cabin could feel it. Not as tension, not as fear, but as clarity settling into place, one decision at a time. The cabin did not need an announcement to know something final was approaching. It felt it, in the way people stopped shifting in their seats, in the way even the smallest sounds, fabric brushing against leather, a quiet breath, the distant hum of the engines, seemed to carry more weight than before. Darius remained still, not anticipating, not reacting, simply present in the center of a moment that no longer belonged to chance. Captain Daniel Reeves stood near the aisle, his posture no longer that of command, but of alignment, as if he had stepped out of control and into responsibility. Carla Jensen stood beside him, hands lightly clasped, eyes steady, no longer uncertain about where she stood. And just a few feet away, Nicole Harris and Brian Foster remained where they had been, but they did not look the same. Something had shifted in their posture, in their silence, in the way they held themselves inside the space. The overhead speaker clicked once, softer this time, but the effect was immediate. Every head turned forward again. "Executive operations speaking," the voice said, calm and unhurried. "Review of onboard incident is complete." The words did not rush. They did not need to. They carried the weight of conclusion. Nicole's shoulders tightened slightly. Brian exhaled through his nose, his eyes fixed on the floor for a brief second before lifting again. Mia stood still, her attention locked on the speaker, her expression focused, almost bracing. "All actions taken during boarding have been verified against system records and internal policy," the voice continued. "Discrepancies between procedure and execution have been confirmed." The phrasing was careful, precise, but the meaning was clear. This was no longer about uncertainty. It was about outcome. Darius did not move. He did not need to. The system was already speaking the language he understood best. Facts, process, consequence. Daniel glanced briefly at Darius, then back toward the front, as if acknowledging that whatever came next would define more than just this moment. Effective immediately, the voice said, "Crew members Nicole Harris and Brian Foster are relieved of active duty pending full compliance review. The words landed without volume, but the effect was immediate. Nicole blinked once, then again, as if trying to process the shift between who she had been 10 minutes ago and who she was now. Brian straightened slightly, not in defiance, but in reflex, as if posture alone could hold something together that had already been decided. No one spoke. No one reacted loudly. The silence held. Because this was not spectacle. This was consequence. Carla inhaled slowly, then stepped forward half a pace, her voice calm but grounded. "Understood," she said, acknowledging the instruction without hesitation. Daniel nodded beside her, his expression steady, not surprised, but resolved. "We will comply," he added. Nicole looked at him, then at Darius, then at the screen. "This is happening now," she said quietly. Not a question, not disbelief, just recognition. Darius met her gaze, his expression unchanged. "It was always happening," he said. "You just reached the point where it could no longer be ignored." The sentence settled between them, not harsh, not accusatory, but undeniable. Brian let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering slightly. "We did not think it would go this far," he admitted. Darius nodded once. "That is the problem with assumptions," he said. "They do not show you where they end." The words held. Around them, the passengers remained still, but their presence had changed again. Not just observers, not just witnesses. They were part of a moment that had crossed from tension into truth. The overhead screens updated once more. Crew status adjusted. Interim assignments in progress. Flight status remains grounded. The system was not pausing. It was continuing. Carla turned slightly toward Nicole and Brian, her tone firm but not unkind. "You will need to step back from active positions," she said. "For now, remain present, but do not engage in further passenger interaction." Nicole nodded slowly, the motion small but deliberate. Brian followed, his usual confidence replaced with quiet compliance. They did not argue. There was nothing left to argue against. Mia stepped slightly closer to Carla, her voice steady. "Do you need assistance covering the cabin?" she asked. Carla looked at her, then nodded once. "Yes," she said. "Stay with me." The shift was subtle, but it mattered. Responsibility was being reassigned. Not as punishment, as necessity. Daniel moved a step closer to Darius, his voice low but clear. "I take responsibility for what happened under my command," he said. The statement was direct. No deflection, no delay. Darius looked at him, measuring not the words, but the intention behind them. "Responsibility is not what you say," he replied. "It is what you correct." Daniel nodded once, absorbing it fully. "Then we will correct it," he said. The exchange did not need anything more. It had already established what needed to be established. Nicole looked around the cabin, her eyes moving across the passengers who had witnessed everything, the screens that had recorded everything, the system that had responded to everything. "We were wrong," she said quietly. Not loud, not performative, just true. The words did not change the outcome, but they marked a shift. Brian glanced at her, then nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said. "We were." Darius did not respond immediately. He let the moment hold, because acknowledgement mattered. But it did not erase. It did not reset. It simply defined where things stood. The overhead speaker clicked one final time. "Next phase of review will proceed post-landing," the voice said. "Replacement crew is en route. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. The aircraft remained still, grounded, but no longer suspended. It had direction again, just not the one it started with." Carla turned toward the cabin, her voice calm and composed. "We appreciate your patience," she said to the passengers. "We will resume boarding once replacement crew arrives." No one complained. No one resisted. Because what had just happened was bigger than delay. It was correction. Darius glanced once more at seat 2A, then back toward the front of the cabin. He did not sit yet. He did not reclaim anything. Because the point had never been the seat. It had been the standard. And now, that standard had been made visible to everyone in the room. Without shouting, without force, just truth, applied at the right moment, with the right weight, and allowed to speak for itself. The cabin did not return to normal after the announcement. It redefined what normal meant. Conversations did not resume in the way they had before. No one leaned back into casual comfort. Instead, a quiet awareness settled into every row, into every seat, into every glance exchanged between strangers who had just witnessed something that could not be undone. Darius finally lowered himself into seat 2A, not as a victory, not as a reclaiming, but as a continuation of what had always been true. The leather seat did not change. The space did not shift, but the meaning behind it had. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat slowly stopped recording. She did not rush to review the footage. She simply looked at Darius, her expression thoughtful, as if she understood that what she had captured was not just a moment, but a pattern breaking in real time. The man who had been drinking champagne earlier leaned back, his glass untouched on the tray beside him, his earlier amusement replaced with something closer to reflection. "I have flown first class for 20 years, he said quietly, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough to be heard. And I have never seen the system stop like that." Darius did not respond. He did not need to. The system had not stopped. It had corrected. That difference lingered in the air like a truth people were still learning how to process. At the front of the cabin, Carla Jensen moved with measured precision, coordinating with Mia to quietly reassign responsibilities. There was no panic, no rushed energy, just deliberate motion, the kind that follows clarity. "We will maintain service readiness," Carla said softly to Mia. "But we wait for the new crew before resuming full operations." Mia nodded, her posture steady, her earlier hesitation replaced with confidence that came from understanding. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. Behind them, Nicole and Brian stood off to the side, no longer part of the operation, but not removed from the moment either. They remained present, but different, quieter, more aware. Nicole's eyes moved across the cabin again, not searching for validation, but taking in the reality she had helped create. "I thought I knew how to read situations," she said under her breath. Brian glanced at her, then followed her gaze. "We read it wrong," he said. The words were simple, but they held weight. Not because they fixed anything, but because they named it clearly. Darius sat still, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, his gaze forward, not focused on any one person, but on the space itself. The aircraft felt different now, not just grounded physically, but anchored in something more deliberate. The overhead screens remained active, displaying status updates that no longer felt technical, but symbolic. Replacement crew inbound. Compliance review ongoing. Passenger boarding paused. Each line carried more than information. It carried consequence. Captain Daniel Reeves stepped back toward the cockpit briefly, speaking in low tones to someone inside, then returned to the cabin, his expression composed but firm. He no longer looked like a man managing a disruption. He looked like a man participating in a correction. He paused near Darius, just for a moment. "I have reviewed initial logs," he said quietly. "Everything aligns with what you stated." Darius nodded once. "It usually does," he replied. Daniel let out a small breath, almost a half smile, not of humor, but of acknowledgement. "We get used to trusting the system," he said. "Sometimes we forget the system only works if we do." Darius glanced at him briefly. "Systems do not fail first," he said. "People do." The exchange was brief, but it carried something deeper than the moment itself. Daniel nodded, then stepped away, returning to coordinate with Carla. In the aisle, Mia moved past seat 2A, pausing for just a second. "Thank you," she said quietly, not drawing attention, not expecting a response. Darius looked at her, just for a moment. "For what?" he asked. Mia hesitated, then answered honestly. "For not letting it slide," she said. The words lingered. "Because that was the choice, in the beginning. To let it slide. To accept the shift. To move to the back without question. And in that small, almost invisible moment, everything could have ended before it began." Darius nodded slightly. "Silence only protects the wrong thing," he said. Mia absorbed that, then continued down the aisle, her steps steady, her role now clearer than it had been minutes ago. The cabin remained quiet, but not empty. It was full of thought, full of reflection, full of people reconsidering what they had seen, what they had assumed, what they might have done in the same situation. The man with the champagne finally picked up his glass again, but he did not drink. He just held it, looking at the liquid as if it no longer mattered. "Funny," he said softly, almost to himself. "All that money for a seat, and none of it means anything if the system decides otherwise." Darius did not look at him, but his voice carried just enough to reach. "It only means something when the system is fair," he said. The man nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected to. At the front, the aircraft door opened briefly. Ground crew voices echoed faintly from outside, then faded again as the door closed. The timeline was moving. The next phase was approaching. Carla glanced at the time on her watch, then at Daniel. 5 minutes, she said. Daniel nodded. We hold steady, he replied. No one argued. No one questioned. Because the moment no longer required explanation. It required completion. Nicole looked at Darius one more time, her expression no longer defensive, no longer uncertain, but grounded in something more difficult. Accountability. You did not raise your voice once, she said quietly. Darius turned his head slightly. I did not need to, he replied. The words were simple, but they carried everything that had just happened inside them. Around them, the cabin remained still. Not waiting, not restless, just present. Because something had already changed. Not in the seats, not in the service, but in the standard that defined who belonged and why. And for the first time since boarding began, that standard was no longer invisible. The aircraft door opened again, but this time it did not bring uncertainty with it. It brought transition. The quiet shuffle of new footsteps moved through the entryway, measured, composed, different from before. The replacement crew stepped in not with urgency, but with awareness, as if they already understood that they were not just entering a flight, but stepping into a moment that had already changed direction. At the front, Carla Jensen turned slightly, her posture shifting into coordination mode without hesitation. Welcome on board, she said, her tone steady, professional, but carrying a subtle weight of context. The lead of the incoming crew, a tall woman with a calm presence and a name tag that read Angela Brooks, nodded once. She did not ask what happened. She did not need to. The screens had already told the story. The atmosphere had already explained the rest. Angela's eyes moved briefly across the cabin, taking in the stillness, the raised phones, the quiet attention, then settled on Darius for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. Not recognition. Respect. The kind that comes from understanding the shape of a moment without needing it explained. We will take it from here, she said calmly. Carla nodded, stepping slightly to the side but not leaving her position entirely. This was not a handoff. It was a continuation. Captain Daniel Reeves stepped forward, addressing both crews with the same steady tone he had held since stepping out of the cockpit. We proceed with full compliance, he said. No assumptions. Full verification on all assignments. The words were simple, but they carried a new standard. Not suggested. Established. Angela nodded again. Understood, she replied. Then she turned to the cabin, her voice clear but composed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will resume boarding shortly with updated crew assignments and verified seating. No one complained. No one rushed. Because the delay no longer felt like inconvenience. It felt like correction being completed. Darius remained seated in 2A, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. He did not look toward the new crew immediately. He did not need to. The shift had already happened before they arrived. Angela moved down the aisle, stopping briefly near Nicole and Brian. She did not confront them. She did not question them. She simply acknowledged them with a small nod, then continued forward. It was not dismissal. It was recognition of where they now stood in the moment. Off to the side, observing what they had once controlled. Nicole watched her pass, her expression calm but heavy, as if she was seeing her role reflected in someone else's execution of it. That is how it should have looked, she said quietly. Brian nodded once, not arguing, not deflecting. Yeah, he replied. It is. The truth did not need explanation anymore. It was visible in contrast. Mia stepped closer to Angela as she reached the front of the cabin. All systems have been overridden, she said, her tone professional, confident. We are operating under executive review. Angela glanced at the screens, then back at Mia. Then we follow the system, she said simply. No hesitation. No reinterpretation. Just alignment. Darius glanced briefly toward them, then back ahead. That was the difference. Not knowledge. Not experience. Alignment. The cabin screens updated once more. Replacement crew active. Boarding sequence restarting. Verification protocol enforced. Each line reinforced what had already been proven. The system was not the problem. The way it was used had been. Captain Reeves stepped back toward the cockpit, pausing once more near Darius. We are ready to proceed when you are, he said. The statement was quiet, but it carried a level of acknowledgement that had not existed before. Darius looked at him for a moment. Proceed when the system confirms, he replied. Daniel nodded once. Understood. No push. No override. Just adherence. Angela moved toward seat 2A, stopping just beside Darius. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice respectful but natural, not performative. Your seat is confirmed. Thank you for your patience. Darius looked up at her, his expression unchanged, but his eyes steady. Thank you for verifying, he said. The exchange was brief, but it carried everything the moment had been about. Not power, not authority. Process. Angela gave a small nod, then continued down the aisle, ensuring each passenger's seat was verified with quiet efficiency. No assumptions, no shortcuts, just confirmation. One by one, the cabin began to move again, but differently. Slower, more deliberate. Passengers adjusted, some returning to their conversations, others still watching, still processing. The man with the champagne finally took a sip, but his expression remained thoughtful. Never thought I would see something like that, he said softly. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat glanced at her phone, then back at Darius. You did not do anything dramatic, she said. You just let it happen. Darius turned his head slightly. I did not let it happen, he said. I let it reveal itself. The distinction settled between them, quiet but clear. At the front, Angela finished her checks and turned back toward Carla. All seats verified, she said. Carla nodded, a small but meaningful shift in her posture. Thank you, she replied. Captain Reeves's voice came over the speaker again, this time steady, controlled, familiar. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for departure. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. The words sounded routine, but they carried something new beneath them. Awareness. The aircraft had not changed. The route had not changed, but the standard inside it had. Darius leaned back slightly in his seat, his gaze forward, not focused on any one thing, but present in the space that had just been redefined. Around him, the cabin settled into motion again. Not the same as before. More precise, more aware, because something had been exposed. And once exposed, it could not return to being unseen. The aircraft did not rush into motion. It transitioned, slowly, deliberately, as if even the machinery understood that something fundamental had just shifted inside its walls. The cabin lights remained soft, the engines humming with a steady rhythm, but the atmosphere carried a new kind of weight. Not tension, not discomfort, awareness. Darius sat back in seat 2A, his posture relaxed but not disengaged, his gaze steady, not on any one person, but on the space itself. Around him, the cabin began to move again, but the movement felt different, more intentional. Angela Brooks continued down the aisle, completing final checks with quiet precision, her voice calm, her actions consistent. Each interaction was simple, verified, confirmed. No assumptions, no shortcuts, just process. The passengers responded in kind. No one challenged, no one questioned, because the standard had been made visible, and once visible, it could not be ignored. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat leaned back slightly, her phone now resting in her lap. She was no longer recording. She was thinking. I have seen people argue for less, she said quietly, her voice thoughtful. But you did not argue at all. Darius turned his head just enough to acknowledge her. Arguments do. Not fixed systems, he said. Clarity does. The sentence lingered, settling into the space between them. The man with the champagne nodded slowly, swirling the glass in his hand without taking another sip. Most people would have raised their voice, he added. Darius looked forward again. Most people are taught that volume equals power, he replied. It does not. The distinction held. It reshaped the way the moment was being understood, not just by those who had been involved, but by those who had witnessed it. At the front of the cabin, Carla Jensen stood beside Angela, reviewing final confirmations. All passenger assignments verified, Angela said. No discrepancies. Carla nodded, her expression steady, no longer carrying the weight of uncertainty, but the clarity of completion. Good, she replied. Then we move forward. Captain Daniel Reeves's voice came through the speaker again, this time with a tone that felt grounded in something more than routine. Ladies and gentlemen, we are cleared for departure, he said. Thank you for your patience. We will be pushing back shortly. The words sounded familiar. Standard. But they carried a different meaning now. Not just an announcement. A transition. The aircraft began to move, slowly pulling away from the gate. The motion was smooth, controlled, but the significance behind it was not lost on anyone in the cabin. This was not just a flight resuming. It was a system continuing after being corrected. Nicole and Brian remained near the front, no longer part of the active crew, but still present, still watching. Nicole's eyes followed Angela as she worked, her expression thoughtful, almost reflective. "She is not doing anything different," she said quietly. Brian shook his head slightly. "She is doing everything we did not," he replied. The words were not harsh. They were honest. And honesty, in that moment, carried more weight than defense ever could. Mia moved through the aisle, assisting Angela where needed, her movements confident, aligned with the process she now understood more clearly than before. She paused briefly near Darius again, not to speak this time, but to acknowledge with a small nod. It was not gratitude anymore. It was recognition. Recognition of what had been revealed and what it required moving forward. Darius nodded back, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough. The cabin settled into a rhythm as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Conversations resumed in low tones, but they were different now. Not casual. Considered. The man with the champagne leaned slightly toward the woman across the aisle. "You think this happens often?" he asked. She considered the question for a moment before answering. "I think it happens more than we notice," she said. "We just do not usually see it go this far." The truth in her words did not need emphasis. It was already understood. Darius remained quiet, his presence no longer the center of attention, but still the anchor of the moment that had just passed. He did not look around to measure reactions. He did not seek acknowledgement, because the point had never been recognition. It had been correction. At the front, Angela secured the final cabin check and took her position, her movements steady, consistent. Carla stepped back slightly, allowing the new structure to operate fully. The transition was complete. Not forced. Not rushed. Seamless. Captain Reeves's voice returned once more. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff," he said. The instruction moved through the aircraft, but this time, it carried a different kind of clarity. Not just procedural. Intentional. The aircraft paused briefly at the runway. Engines building power, the low hum rising into something stronger, more defined. The moment before takeoff stretched, not with tension, but with anticipation. Not of the flight itself, but of what it now represented. Darius leaned back slightly, his eyes forward, calm, composed. He had not raised his voice. He had not forced the outcome. He had simply allowed the system to reveal what it was when tested. And now, the system had responded. The engines roared to life, the aircraft accelerating down the runway, the ground beneath it fading as it lifted into the air. The cabin shifted slightly with the motion, passengers settling into their seats as the plane climbed steadily into the sky. The city below grew smaller, the noise of the ground replaced by the steady rhythm of flight. But inside the cabin, something remained. Not the tension, not the conflict, the clarity. It stayed with them, carried upward, embedded in the space, in the process, in the understanding that had been forced into the open. Nicole looked out the window for a moment, then back into the cabin, her expression quiet but resolved. "It was never about the seat," she said softly. Brian nodded. "No," he replied. "It was not." And Darius, seated in 2A, did not respond. He did not need to, because the answer was already there, in every action that had followed, in every system that had adjusted, in every person who had seen the difference between assumption and truth. And now, there was no going back. At 35,000 feet, the cabin settled into a quiet that felt earned rather than routine. The engines carried a steady, unwavering rhythm, and the clouds outside stretched into an endless white horizon, soft and distant, untouched by what had unfolded below. Inside, however, nothing felt untouched. The shift remained, subtle but permanent, woven into the way people sat, the way they looked, the way they thought. Darius Cole remained in seat 2A, still composed, still present, but now almost invisible in the way true authority often becomes once it no longer needs to prove itself. Angela Brooks moved through the aisle with quiet efficiency, offering drinks, checking on passengers, her tone consistent, her actions grounded in verification rather than assumption. Each interaction carried the same standard, applied evenly, without hesitation. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat accepted a glass of water, her eyes briefly meeting Angela's before shifting toward Darius again, not with curiosity anymore, but with understanding. The man with the champagne finally took a sip, then set the glass down again, his attention no longer fixed on luxury, but on something far less visible and far more important. Near the front, Nicole and Brian remained seated in the jump seats, no longer part of the active rhythm of the flight, but still within its presence. Nicole's posture had changed completely. Her shoulders were no longer squared in authority, but settled in reflection. She watched Angela work, noting every detail, every confirmation, every pause before action. She checks everything, Nicole said quietly. Brian nodded. She trusts the process, he replied. Nicole shook her head slightly. No, she said. She respects it. The distinction lingered between them. It was small, but it carried weight. Mia passed by again, assisting another passenger, her movements confident, her voice steady. She was no longer hesitant, no longer unsure of her place. The moment earlier had not just shown her what went wrong. It had shown her what right looked like. Darius leaned back slightly, his gaze forward, not focused on any one thing, but present in the space that now moved around him with a different kind of clarity. He did not engage in conversation. He did not seek acknowledgement, because the outcome had already been achieved, not in the removal of individuals, not in the delay of the flight, but in the exposure of a standard that had been invisible until it was tested. The overhead chimes sounded softly, signaling the cabin had reached cruising altitude. Captain Reeves's voice followed, calm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached cruising altitude. We appreciate your patience earlier. Our crew is here to ensure your comfort for the remainder of the flight. The words were simple, familiar, but beneath them, something had changed. They were no longer just a promise. They were a commitment that had just been proven necessary. Angela paused briefly near Darius, not interrupting, not imposing, but present enough to acknowledge. Is there anything you need, sir? She asked. Darius looked at her, his expression calm. No, he said. Everything is exactly as it should be. Angela gave a small nod, then continued down the aisle, her role clear, her execution consistent. At the front, Carla Jensen reviewed notes quietly, documenting details that would not be forgotten once the flight ended. This was not just an incident. It was a record, a reference point, something that would shape decisions beyond this aircraft, beyond this day. Nicole watched her for a moment, then looked back at Brian. This is going to follow us, she said. Brian did not hesitate. It should, he replied. There was no resistance in his voice, no attempt to minimize, just acceptance. And acceptance, in that moment, carried more strength than denial ever could. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as passengers settled into the rhythm of flight. Some leaned back to rest. Others continued quiet conversations. But beneath it all, there was a shared awareness, a silent agreement that what had happened mattered, that it was not isolated, that it reflected something larger. The woman in the beige coat glanced out the window, then back at Darius. You changed something today, she said softly. Darius turned his head slightly. No, he replied. It was already there. She tilted her head, considering that. Then you revealed it, she said. Darius gave a small nod. Exactly. The distinction mattered, because it shifted the focus away from him and back onto the system itself. The responsibility did not belong to one moment. It belonged to every moment that had come before it and every moment that would follow. The man with the champagne leaned forward slightly. Do you think it will actually change anything? He asked. Darius looked forward again, his voice calm. That depends on whether people choose to remember it, he said. The answer did not promise anything. It did not guarantee change. It placed responsibility where it belonged, on those who had seen, on those who had understood. At the front, Angela completed another pass through the cabin, her movements steady, consistent, unaffected by the earlier disruption, but not unaware of it either. The difference was subtle, but clear. She was not just doing her job. She was upholding a standard that had just been defined in front of everyone. Captain Reeves stepped out briefly once more, his eyes scanning the cabin, not for issues, but for alignment. He paused near Nicole and Brian, his voice low. We will review everything after landing, he said. Nicole nodded. We will be ready, she replied. Brian followed with a quiet nod of his own. No excuses, no arguments, just acknowledgement. The aircraft continued its path. Through the sky, steady, controlled, moving forward with the same precision it always had. But inside, something had shifted permanently. Not in the mechanics, not in the route, in the understanding of what it meant to belong, to verify, to respect the system that everyone relied on. Darius remained still, his presence no longer the center of attention, but still the anchor of what had been revealed. He did not need to speak again. He did not need to act again, because the moment had already done its work. And as the aircraft moved forward through open sky, one truth remained, quiet but unshakable. The system had not been broken. It had simply been seen. By the time the cabin lights dimmed into their softer evening tone, the flight no longer felt like a continuation of what had started on the ground. It felt like something that had been reset midair, not by force, but by clarity. The quiet inside the aircraft was not empty. It was reflective. Conversations, when they happened, were lower, more deliberate, as if everyone understood that something had shifted beneath the surface of an ordinary flight. Darius Cole remained seated in 2A, his posture unchanged, his presence steady but no longer commanding attention. That part had already passed. Now, he was simply part of the environment again, though the impact of what had unfolded continued to ripple outward in ways that did not need visibility to exist. Angela Brooks continued her work through the cabin with the same measured rhythm, offering refills, checking seat comfort, ensuring every interaction followed the same standard. No hesitation, no assumption, each step deliberate, each response grounded. It was not dramatic. It was consistent. And that consistency now carried more weight than anything that had happened earlier. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat had opened a small notebook, writing something down in quiet focus, pausing occasionally to glance up, as if trying to capture more than just memory. The man with the champagne had finished his drink, but did not ask for another. He leaned back, eyes closed for a moment, not sleeping, just processing. At the front of the cabin, Nicole and Brian remained seated, no longer part of the system's movement, but still within its reach. Nicole's hands rested in her lap, her fingers still now, no longer tapping or gripping, just still. "It feels different," she said quietly. Brian nodded, not looking at her, his gaze forward. "It is," he replied. She exhaled slowly. "Not just because of what happened," she added. "Because of what it showed." Brian finally turned his head slightly. "Yeah," he said. "That too." Their voices were low, but the meaning behind them did not need volume. It had already settled into the space around them. Mia passed through the aisle again, assisting a passenger with a small request, her tone calm, her posture aligned. She moved with a quiet confidence that had not been there at the start of the flight. The difference was not in skill. It was in awareness. She had seen the gap between assumption and verification. And now, she was choosing differently. Darius glanced briefly toward the window, the sky stretching endlessly beyond, then back toward the cabin. He did not reflect outwardly. He did not narrate what had happened, because the moment did not belong to explanation anymore. It belonged to understanding. The overhead chimes sounded softly, signaling a mid-flight update. Captain Reeves's voice followed, steady and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are continuing smoothly at cruising altitude. Thank you again for your patience earlier. We remain committed to ensuring a safe and respectful experience for everyone on board." The words carried a subtle shift. Respect was no longer implied. It was stated, and that difference mattered. Angela paused near Carla Jensen at the front, reviewing a tablet quietly. "Preliminary report is already being compiled," Carla said, her voice low but firm. "Executive team is monitoring in real time." Angela nodded once. "Good," she replied. "Then it will not be forgotten." Carla met her gaze. "It cannot be," she said. Behind them, Nicole heard that. She did not turn immediately, but the words reached her, and she understood what they meant. Not just for the company. For her. Brian shifted slightly in his seat. "Do you think they will let us explain?" He asked quietly. Nicole considered the question before answering. "We already did," she said. "Just not in words." The truth in that response did not need elaboration. Their actions had spoken, and now, the system had responded. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat closed her notebook and looked toward Darius again. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said softly. Darius turned his head slightly. "Which part?" he asked. "That you did not change anything, she replied. You revealed it. Darius gave a small nod. Because it was always there, he said. She leaned back, absorbing that. Then I guess the real question is what happens next, she said. Darius looked forward again, his voice calm. That depends on whether people act differently when no one is watching, he said. The answer lingered, because it moved beyond the moment, beyond the flight, into something larger. The cabin settled again into quiet. Not heavy, not tense, just aware. Angela continued her final checks, ensuring everything remained aligned. Carla documented details that would carry beyond landing. Mia moved with steady purpose, no longer uncertain of her role. Captain Reeves remained focused, his leadership now grounded in something deeper than routine. And Nicole and Brian sat in stillness, not removed from consequence, but present within it. The aircraft continued its path through the sky, steady and precise, unchanged in its destination, but altered in what it now carried with it. Not just passengers, not just luggage, but a moment that had shifted the understanding of what fairness looked like when it was tested. Darius remained seated, his presence quiet, his role complete. He had not needed to raise his voice. He had not needed to prove his identity with force. He had simply allowed the system to reveal itself under pressure. And now, as the aircraft moved forward, one thing was clear to everyone who had witnessed it. The difference between assumption and truth is not always loud. But when it appears, it changes everything. The descent began almost without notice, a gentle shift in the angle of the aircraft, a subtle change in engine tone that only those paying close attention would catch. Outside the window, the endless stretch of white clouds began to break, revealing glimpses of the city below, small at first, then slowly taking shape. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained steady, calm, but not empty. It carried the quiet weight of something completed, something understood, something that would not be undone simply because the flight was nearing its end. Darius Cole remained seated in 2A, his posture unchanged, his presence still grounded, still composed. He had not moved much since takeoff, not out of restraint, but because there was nothing left to prove. The system had already spoken, and more importantly, it had been heard. Angela Brooks moved through the cabin one final time before landing, her voice calm, her actions precise, confirming seat belts, tray tables, and cabin readiness. Every step mirrored the standard that had been established earlier, not as a reaction, but as a continuation. Across the aisle, the woman in the beige coat closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, looking out the window as the city grew larger beneath them. The man with the champagne sat quietly, his glass now empty, his attention no longer fixed on service, but on something internal, something reflective. At the front, Carla Jensen secured her tablet, final notes already submitted, her role in the moment complete, but not finished in impact. Nicole and Brian remained seated, their presence quieter than ever, but not diminished. It had transformed. Nicole looked down at her hands again, then slowly lifted her gaze toward the aisle. I keep replaying it, she said softly. Brian nodded. Me too, he replied. She took a slow breath. Not what he said, she added. What we did. Brian leaned back slightly. Yeah, he said. That part stays. The truth of that settled between them, not heavy, but permanent. It was no longer about the outcome. It was about the choice that led to it. Mia stood near the middle of the cabin, securing overhead bins, her movement steady, her focus clear. She had not spoken much since earlier, but her actions reflected something deeper than words. She had seen the gap, and now she was choosing not to step into it again. Captain Reeves's voice came through the speaker once more, calm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our descent. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened. We will be landing shortly. The words were routine, but they carried a quiet sense of closure. Not just of the flight, of the moment that had defined it. Darius glanced briefly out the window, watching as the ground drew closer, the patterns of streets and buildings becoming clearer. Then he looked forward again, his expression unchanged. He had not come onto this flight expecting anything extraordinary. He had simply encountered something familiar. And this time, he had not allowed it to pass unnoticed. Angela paused briefly near his seat, her voice soft but steady. We appreciate your patience today, she said. Darius looked at her. I appreciate the correction, he replied. Angela gave a small nod, then continued forward, her role complete, her standard intact. The aircraft lowered gradually, the city now fully visible beneath them, the runway stretching out in the distance. The cabin grew quieter as passengers prepared for landing, the hum of the engines shifting again, softer now, controlled, precise. Nicole looked toward Darius one last time, her expression not searching, not defensive, but grounded. "You said something earlier," she said quietly, her voice just enough to carry. Darius turned his head slightly. "You said we replaced verification with judgment." He nodded once. "Yes," he said. Nicole held his gaze for a moment. "I will not do that again," she said. The statement was simple. No emphasis. No performance. Just a decision. Darius looked at her, not measuring, not questioning. "Then something changed," he replied. The words did not praise. They acknowledged. And that acknowledgement carried more weight than anything else could have. Brian glanced between them, then nodded slightly, as if aligning himself with the same realization. The aircraft touched down smoothly, the wheels meeting the runway with a controlled, steady motion. The engines reversed briefly, then settled as the plane slowed, moving forward with quiet certainty. No one clapped. No one reacted. Loudly. The landing felt like the moment itself. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just complete. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, the cabin lights brightened slightly, signaling arrival. But the atmosphere did not reset. It remained. Carried forward. Embedded. Angela and Carla prepared for deplaning, their movements coordinated, their roles clear. Mia stood ready to assist, her posture aligned with everything she had learned in the span of a single flight. Nicole and Brian remained seated until the aircraft came to a full stop, their silence no longer empty, but reflective. Darius remained in his seat as well, not rushing to stand, not eager to leave, simply present in the final moments of something that had already concluded long before the wheels touched the ground. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime. Passengers began to stand, reaching for their belongings, but the usual rush felt different, slower, more aware. As people moved into the aisle, some glanced toward Darius, not with curiosity, not with spectacle, but with recognition. Not of who he was, but of what had happened. The woman in the beige coat paused briefly as she stepped into the aisle. "You did not need a speech," she said softly. Darius looked at her. "No," he replied. The moment was the message. She nodded, then moved forward with the rest of the passengers. One by one, they exited the aircraft, carrying with them something more than luggage. Something that would stay long after the flight number was forgotten. Nicole stood slowly, stepping into the aisle, pausing for just a second near Darius. "You were right," she said quietly. Darius did not respond immediately. He let the words settle, then spoke. "No," he said. "The system was." And with that, he stood, stepped into the aisle, and moved forward, not as someone who had taken control, but as someone who had revealed what control was supposed to look like. And as the last of the passengers exited the aircraft, one truth remained, steady and undeniable. Real power does not announce itself. It corrects what others ignore.